And look, you wrote on the board. So you can all hear me. Excellent. Thanks for inviting me to University of Pennsylvania. I'm trying to think if I've actually ever given a talk here before. I can't remember. I actually almost came here for college. But that would be, many, many years ago. Over 20, would have been like 25 years ago. But I went to Georgetown instead. And one of my organizers came here instead of Georgetown, so things balanced out in the end. All right, so interesting picture. You guys know? Anyone know what this is? I'd actually be very impressed if anyone knows what this is. I'm just curious. Nobody knows what this is. Okay, that's good. That makes sense. You know what it is?
Is it ancient Mesopotamian art?
Good guess, but totally wrong. This actually is from a place called Qaryat al-Faw, which is southeast of Mecca. And so it's sort of north of what's today Yemen, but southeast of Mecca. It was an old caravan city. And this is an art wall painting, probably from around 100 AD. And on the walls there are inscriptions. You can actually see them here. The language there is epigraphic South Arabian, ancient South Arabian language. Very similar to Arabic, but a different language. And it seems like they were speaking kind of an ancestor of classical Arabic. But this is probably, as far as I know, one of the most closest in terms of proximate in terms of time to how Arabs in the Hijaz in the 7th century would have represented themselves in art. Also, I mean, granted, if you go to one of those restaurants where they give you some crayons for your kids and they have like 3 crayons, right? And if you had to represent yourself, you like green, yellow, and red, you might not have the most accurate picture, but you can see they actually have a lot of colors. I mean, they do some really like subtle shading on the kind of the light on his forehead and the shading under his lips. This is probably a nobleman. He's got 2 ladies behind him offering him grapes. You can see, you can even see he has a kind of 5 o'clock shadow drawn in. Their hair is sort of wavy and big. These big, almost like Byzantine artistic style eyes. And the skin is, what color would you say the skin is? Anybody have any guesses? Anybody here do art history or anything like that? No? Nobody does art history or nobody has any guesses? Any of you just like talking about colors? Yeah.
My guess is black.
Their skin is black?
My guess is that's what they're trying to represent.
I don't think that's black. His facial hair is black. It's like that one bad TV show I saw once that had one funny joke, which is, "This is New York, we wear black until they find something darker." That's as dark as you can get, as far as I know. His facial hair. The color is, it's sort of like burnt sienna, or ochre, or red. How would you make this? You make this out of some kind of iron oxide painting, or minerals. By the way, when Egyptians and when Mesopotamians want to depict people they call black, what color do they use?
Right?
Black.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was a trick question. They use black. And I mean, they say pitch black. You know what pitch black means? What's pitch? Pitch is tar. The stuff you put on road surfaces. Tar, that's tar, pitch. Or they say ink black, which is ink. So when they want to make someone black, they use actually black color, which is actually kind of weird because most people in the world, there are very few people in the world who actually have totally pitch black skin, like the color of her hijab. Just like there's very few people in the world who have white skin. You'd have to be like David Bowie in the 1970s. It's pretty funny. I remember, I've been trying to find this clip online. I can't find it anywhere. It's this movie about David Bowie. And this guy, he's like a American jazz artist, African-American jazz artist. He's talking about how he met David Bowie for the first time. He's like, this guy came in, he was white. I mean white. Actually physically white, like the color of his sweatshirt. Very few people like that. Like the wall here. Who came up with the idea of calling white people white? These are my kids. Do you guys actually know the answer to this, or are you just raising your hands? Who?
Yeah. So before, when they left Africa a long time ago, probably some Jews said that we're white and we're different from them.
Interesting point. It did happen after humans left Africa, because even when you go very far north, you have to, in order to synthesize vitamin D or whatever, you need to have lighter skin so you can absorb the radiation or something to that effect. Not totally correct answer. Later than that. Anyone guess? Hint, they gave us a lot of stuff, like roads and a lot of good movies. Romans. As far as I know, the Romans are the first people who are like white people. For them, albus, which means one of the words in Latin for white, albus means the normal, sort of standard Mediterranean look. You can just go grab an Italian guy off the street right now, compliment him on his clothes, and say, look at his skin color, probably he's albus. What did Romans call people from Northern Europe? People like me.
No, I was going to say barbarians.
Yeah, of course. That's just that. Mazen, do you actually know the answer?
Viking.
What?
Viking.
They did not call them Vikings. That's a good guess, though. The Vikings were later. Good guess. They called them Palidus. Palidus. Where do we get? We got what word from that? Pallid, or pale. Pallid. So interesting. This is a lot like how an ancient, Egyptian 2000 BC, or an ancient Mesopotamian, or a Roman would represent themselves in painting. It's very interesting. But it's a good question. Where did Romans get the idea of calling themselves white? Where do you get the idea of calling people black? That's an interesting question. Why? I mean, it's an interesting question. If you were going to come up with words for color, and you were supposed to just say, okay, what is everyone's color in this room, and you were supposed to think of different things, I don't think white and black would actually come to our minds if we just came at it from a totally blank palette, correct? But at some point, humans, and it seems to have been pretty widely agreed upon, decided to say black and white, which is very interesting. There's theories for this. None of them are very good, to be on my personal opinion. But this is interesting because you're seeing how people, Maz and Hashem, why are you guys having hands?
They know the answer.
No, you don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer. Okay. Interesting point. This is maybe how Arabs, I guess, this is 500 years before the Prophet, but we don't have a lot of artistic evidence from Arabia, period. This is pretty interesting. Question, here's another question for you. What did Arabs in the Hijaz at the time of the Prophet, Western Arabia at the time of the Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, how did they divide up people in terms of color? Or kind of ethnicity, color? Yes? Arabic, and so there's Arab and non-Arab, that's one way. That doesn't have to do with color though. Because, do you know what Bilal, we know Bilal is the first muezzin in Islam. He's, at least some of his ancestry is from Ethiopia. He's generally assumed to have been black. His mother was Ajamiya. Ajamiya means just not Arab. She was Ethiopian. But later on, a couple of decades later, Ajami comes to mean like Persian, not Arab, but from the north.
There's Habashis.
Habashis are Ethiopians. They would say black, white, and red. So black people are like people from Africa or Southern Arabia or India. Red people are what? I'm red. You're red. Sorry to single people out. So we're red. And if you think about it, if I say something really stupid, what's going to happen to me? Or let's say I turn around and there's just my pants split open or something. What's going to happen to me? I'm going to turn around. Even if I get a little bit hot, I'm going to turn. My skin's basically transparent. I don't know if you can see. It's like red and blue. If you saw someone's skin like mine, you'd be like, that guy's kind of purpley red color. So red would be like people from some Syrians, Turkish people from the northern Middle East. And then, what would they say about like Irish people? They call them blue, sometimes blonde, sometimes blue. Why would blue is really, if you think about like people who are really light skinned, you can almost see their veins, like a bluish color. Okay, if that's red and that's black, what's white? White is just like a kind of lighter skinned Arab, kind of a typical Arab color would be like a white. Interesting. All right. Why are we talking about this topic? They asked me to talk about social justice, which is terrific. I want to talk about issues of race because that's in the news. Not because I just talk about things that are topical, because people ask me these questions. I wrote a book on Islam and slavery. It's called Slavery and Islam. Not because I have any passion about this topic, because I had questions about the relationship between slavery and Islam. People had questions about this because of ISIS and other things like that. And they kept asking me the questions, and I wanted to know the answers, and I want to give people the answers, so I wrote this book. And then people kept asking me about Islam and blackness. Is Islam an anti-black religion? Etc., etc. Why are Muslims racist? Etc., etc. So I wanted to address that issue as well. That's why I wrote this new book called Islam and Blackness. And if you're talking about issues of social justice in the United States, the issues of race and issues of slavery are going to come up. So this is important things. These are important topics to have knowledge about, I'd say. Now, all right. Why are we talking about slavery at the beginning of this lecture? Seems like a really tough opening topic. It's a very upsetting topic, right? Because if you talk about that's a rhetorical question, Mads. It's not an actual question. But Layla, can you explain to him what a rhetorical question is? So the reason where I want to bring this up first is because if you're a Muslim, or if you are just involved in discussions around Islam and social justice, or Muslims and social justice, this is sort of like the elephant in the room. Is that what it is? 300-pound gorilla. It's some kind of big animal that nobody wants to talk about or mention. That's an elephant in the room, right? Okay, good. So, because Muslims in America really tend to care about social justice issues. Of course, not all of them, right? But a lot of, especially young Muslims, are really concerned with things like racism and social justice, and they feel that they can participate in this cause sincerely, meaningfully. They mean this like deeply in their hearts. But the problem is that, well, two problems. One, unless you haven't watched the news in the last 6 years, a lot of times slavery is associated with Islam. The second issue is that even if you don't watch the news, usually there's some person, and they can come from a variety of different ideological backgrounds, who will actually bring up things like the Arab slave trade, Islamic slave trade, right? And they'll really make this explicit connection historically and today between Islam and slavery. So really, people have to know how to address this topic. Matt, what is it?
Also, slavery started by 4 countries and rich countries.
4 countries and rich countries. Interesting idea. How did slavery start?
4 countries.
No, that's a question for other people. How did slavery start? I mean, that's like asking, how ordering out. I mean, how do you know when things started in history? You can just go back to as far as you can trace things in terms of records, right? Well, what is anybody know? Anybody have a guess? Yeah.
It would be like prisoners of war.
Prisoners actually is exactly it. Captives. Slaves are people you've captured and you decide not to kill. Like, I could kill this guy, but he looks like he knows how to make really good guacamole or something like that. We're going to take him back to our village. We're going to put him to work for us. And maybe eventually this guy actually will want to become part of your community. You don't know. So that's how, as far as we know, at least in the Near East, as far as we can go back with human records, slavery starts with people who are captives. From the outside, the foreign tribes who are captured. A couple of important points. We don't have a lot of time to get into details. I can answer questions if you have them during the Q&A. Someone just sent me this tweet. Don't worry, Layla, I was not on Twitter. My wife controls my social media activity. This is probably very wise. Somebody sent me this. Jordan Peterson said, without divine basis, without a basis in the divine, it's impossible. Without a divine validation of human value, it's impossible to say that slavery is morally wrong. Which is a really interesting point. Not because you need to have a divine belief in the divine to think slavery is morally wrong, but his assumption is that all human beings have always thought that slavery is morally wrong. Does anyone know? Let's just pick a date. Let's pick a date, 1700. How many people, I don't mean how many movements, I mean how many people, like how many actual individuals in human history do we know of who said that slavery in and of itself is morally wrong, morally evil? Any guesses?
0.
Not 0.
Like 10 at best.
I think 4. 4. I want to make this, really stress this. This thing that we all agree is morally reprehensible. Right, I bet if we said, do you think slavery is evil or not? Everyone in this room is going to say, let's test. Who thinks slavery is morally evil? Who thinks slavery is not morally evil? Oh, okay, that seems to be a pretty good, at least representation of university population. How many of you think that, I don't know if I'm not allowed to do this. I mean, how many of you think that, like, abortion is evil?
Abortion is what?
Evil. Nobody thinks that? 1, 2. Okay, thanks, Patrick. So my point is, like, there are other topics that are like disagreed on. This is not disagreed on. But here's an interesting question. If we were to go back to the year let's say 1600, and we asked how many people think abortion is evil, what do you guys think the answer of the room would be?
Pretty much everybody would have the answer.
Yeah, actually, pretty much. I think we're in most places in the world, people would say, at least this is very suspect, right? What's interesting about this topic is this is an issue which is in the 20th century, at least publicly, agreed upon. But prior to, and this is being generous, let's say the 1700s, that's really being generous. 1800s probably more accurate, maybe even 1900s. This was not agreed upon at all. In fact, prior to, let's just pick 1700, Gregory of Nyssa, Christian bishop in Cappadocia, died 394. Jean Baudin, French historian and legal scholar, died 1596. Maybe Giovanni Pontano died 1503, I think, around that time. I think he's from near Venice. And a German guy, a legal scholar from the 1200s named Ecki von Repgau. That's it. 4 people. Not Moses, not Jesus, not St. Augustine, not Thomas Aquinas, not Buddha, not, you name it, not Aristotle, not Plato, not any, you name it. Either they had no problem with slavery, or they thought it was tolerable, or defensible, or even natural. Very interesting. What did Aristotle... Okay, I have a question. When did people start talking about slavery being in and of itself evil in any meaningful way? I'm kind of giving you a hint. Very late 1600s, 1690, there's a tract published by the Quaker Association here in Pennsylvania, actually. Then the 1700s, really mid-1700s, with Montesquieu and his Spirit of the Laws, his discussion of it. Later with Muhammad, Condorcet in the late 1700s. 1800s is late 1700s when you start getting like abolitionist movements in the UK, in Britain and the United States in the late 1700s. 1800s, they really pick up steam. So I have a question. Did people just wake up one day? I mean, this is an interesting question. Did human beings wake up one day, they was like, oh my God, slavery's wrong? I mean, that's actually, by the way, that's actually the general explanation for how this happens. Really, with scholars, they don't really have an explanation other than that. Aristotle, was he smart? Not smart. Plato, smart? Not smart. Buddha, spiritually aware? Not spiritually aware.
Spiritually aware.
Okay, so it seems like what happened? I gave you another hint. Well, this is highly debated, but in my opinion, this is how it happened. Where did I tell you the first major abolitionist declaration came from? It actually wasn't an abolitionist declaration. It was just a criticism of slavery. I told you it's right here in Pennsylvania, 1690. What starts happening? I told you, picks up steam in the 1700s. Really picks up steam in the 1800s. What's happening picking up steam in the 1700s and the 1800s in where are the two places that abolitionism begins? England and the northern United States. What's happening in those two places? Guess what? Aristotle said in his Politics, there will be slaves until looms move themselves. You know what loom is? Like for sewing cloth? Until looms move themselves. That's an incredibly prophetic statement. What happened in the human beings realized they can use first water power, then steam power to do what? Move things, move heavy things. Until that time, what did they use? Animals and other people. So I think this is real, but this is a real moral conundrum, because if you ask somebody today, if there's one thing they're more, what's the thing you bring out as the big, the final hammer in an argument about moral relativism? If you're in a debate about moral relativism, well, if that's the case, slavery would be okay. And then what does the person say? I mean, this is kind of what Jordan Peterson's trying to do in this argument. He's saying, you have to believe in God, because if you don't believe in God, you actually can't say slavery is wrong, and you have to say slavery is wrong. Correct? So that's if there's one thing we're morally sure about, it's slavery is wrong. But if you were to look at human history, to the history of our species, intellectually, socially, this would actually not at all be the case. So this is a real conundrum. You can call this the Charlottesville statue debates. American history is a great example of this. I have a question. What's your name?
Miriam.
Do you take advice from people who support slavery? Would someone come and say, by the way, I really support slavery, and I have some moral advice for you?
I think I hear them out.
You'd hear them out and be like, hey, I have an idea. I want you to elect me to office.
Oh, no.
No, okay? Now, let's say they said, not only do I support this, but I actually have fathered children with my slaves. No?
No.
Not going to be allowed in public life. This is Thomas Jefferson, right? So the problem is, the guy that we look to, one of the guys we look to as our moral and legal and kind of political guides, believed and did things that put him outside of the realm of the acceptable in our society. That's a conundrum. But this is not, this is a human conundrum. It's not an American conundrum. It's not a Muslim conundrum. This is a human conundrum. There is no religious tradition or philosophical tradition that I know of that did not either find slavery acceptable, natural, or defensible prior to the essentially modern period. Maybe early modern period, essentially modern period. What did Muslims say about slavery? It was, first of all, like most other traditions, it was just part of life. Like it was like talking about, the weather or something, or like a disease. You don't want to get some horrible disease, but you don't sit around like, oh, it sucked, it happens to somebody else. You hope it doesn't happen to you. Incidentally, when did people first start talking about abolition? The idea of getting rid of slavery as a concept or as an social institution. When did this start? When is the first instance that somebody talked about abolition? Come on. Did you guys ever watch movies? No Kirk Douglas fans? You guys never saw Spartacus?
I think the age is a little bit dark.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. You guys should go.
It's an old movie.
So Spartacus goes with his slaves, the slave rebellion in the 1st century BCE, around the 60s of the 1st century BCE. Spartacus is a slave who rebels, and according to the movie, he says, we're going to keep fighting until we free all the slaves in Italy. That's not what Spartacus and his other slaves, they didn't want to be slaves. But they weren't trying to end slavery. In fact, they took their own slaves. No society that had slaves, and every civilization, every human civilization that we know of had something that would be similar to, we could talk about slavery. No civilization or society that had slaves even suggested abolishing them until the early modern period. Very interesting. As I said, this is a conundrum. I can't resolve it for you. If you're interested in it, read my book, Slavery and Islam. And if you're uncomfortable, that's not my problem. That's literally not my problem. It's everybody's problem. What did Muslim scholars say about slavery? One, again, it was the Quran affirms the existence of slavery. It's like talking about work or marriage or other things. It's an existing economic, social relationship in the world. But what's very interesting is Muslim scholars always make clear, slavery is harmful. Slavery is a harm. Darar in Arabic. Why is it harmful? One, you can't do whatever you want. I mean, you don't have control over your movements and your labor. You can't enjoy the fruits of your labor. Two, you're not a complete legal person. What does that mean? Like a slave, in most schools of law and Islamic law, can't own property. In most schools of law, they can't be a witness in court. Three, you don't have the full range of requirements that a free Muslim has. So let's say slaves don't have to pay zakat, they don't have to pay charity tax. Slaves don't have to go to Hajj, they don't have to do the Hajj to Mecca. They can if they want, right? So, by the way, I mean, this is a pretty clear listing of, certainly with this idea of not being able to control your movements and enjoy the fruits of your labor, the very clear understanding of the problems in slavery. One of the clear principles that goes back as far as we can identify anything in the Islamic tradition is that God wants freedom. This is it's attributed in a hadith to the Prophet. It's probably not something the Prophet Muhammad said. It's probably something an early Muslim said that got incorrectly attributed to him. But it gets picked up in Islamic legal thought very early. God wants freedom. You see it as a legal maxim in Islamic law. يَتَشَوَّفُ الشَّارِعُ إِلَى الْحُرِّيَّةِ. The lawgiver, God, the lawgiver, looks expectantly towards freedom. God wants freedom. Which is why, in Islamic law, there's always this favoring of emancipation. So, let's say, what's your name?
Abir.
Abir. Let's say Abir and I co-own a slave. Let's say Abir and I co-own a car. And I say, hey Abir, I don't want my half of the car. I give it away. I just gave the car away to somebody. Would that be okay? Like, hey, I have half. I want my half. So, in every Islamic school of law, if we co-own a slave and I decide to set my half free, that slave actually is free now. Now the only question is, do I have to pay you the amount? Do I have to pay you the amount immediately or over time? Or does the ex-slave now have to work to repay you that amount? Or do you just have to take a haircut, as they say in finance? You hear with the Wharton School of Business or whatever, have the haircut. So it's unlike other types of property. If one of the partial owners said you're free, the slave is totally free. Other things. If let's say I'm walking down the street, how about this? Let's say I say to my slave, okay, thanks for setting the table. Listen, you're free until after I don't mean if the second I say you're free, boom, he's free, that's it. Even if I didn't intend it. In Islamic law in general, in contracts, in declarations, in marriage, and all these things, if you make a statement you don't intend, and it happens to be a contract for like some new telephone or something like that, right? I'm not bound by that contract. It was not my intention to sign this. Same thing in Islamic law. But with emancipation, even if it's not intended, even if it's a joke, boom, the person's free. Let's say you bump into somebody. Ahmed ibn Hanbal, the famous jurist of Baghdad, died at age 55, was asked this question. What happens you're walking down the street, you bump into a lady, you say, in Arabic, Ya hurra. Ya hurra means, oh, free lady. It's like, my good lady. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, my good lady, Ya hurra. And it turns out she's your slave. You didn't know that. She's free. Islamic law and civilization is an engine of emancipation. Engine of emancipation. The Quran introduces things unknown before in, as far as I know, human history, which is, it makes, not only is freeing slaves a good deed, but freeing slaves expiates sins. This is in the Quran. If you, let's say if somebody accidentally kills someone, they commit manslaughter. One of the things they have to do, first they have to compensate the person's family. But they also have to free a believing slave. Let's say you, well, not if you're Hanafi, but out the other schools. Let's say it's Ramadan, and I sit here and I'm like giving a lecture and I go, I'm really thirsty. Not accidentally. I do it, I just can't stand it. What have I just done? First of all, I have to redo this day of fasting. What else do I have to do? I have to free a slave. Or if I don't have a slave, I have to feed 60 poor people. Or if I don't have money to do that, I have to fast for... What is going on with the NSA here? Mazen, how much? Fast for what? Times 2. 60 days. That's if you intentionally do it. So don't intentionally break your fast if you don't like fasting, because you're gonna fast a lot. So it makes, then the reward, as stated in the Quran, as stated endlessly in sayings of the Prophet in the Hadith corpus, the reward you get for freeing slaves in the afterlife is enormous. There's kind of an irony here, which is one of the reasons that Muslims, let's say in Egypt or Baghdad or India, keep buying slaves from outside the Islamic world. It's because they keep freeing slaves. It's actually kind of ironic, right? Because they need more labor. So it's sort of like a vacuum machine sucking in people, because they're constantly like freeing them up into the free population. Another big, major difference between slavery and Islamic civilization and Islamic law, and let's say slavery in the United States or in most places in the world. Thomas Jefferson, we talked about him before. His children, what about his children? Does anyone know who they are?
Actually,
Wait, someone said I can't see whose mouth is moving. You?
yeah, I think they share, like his black and white children share ownership of his estate right now. It's kind of
Right now?
Now, yeah.
No, but I mean his immediate children,
Oh, I
not
have
his
no
descendants. He is in the state. Good for him. I don't know. Did anyone know his kids' names? How about John Adams? Anyone know his kids' names? And not just because there was a TV show.
John Quincy Adams?
John Quincy Adams became the president. Let's say John Quincy Adams was the child of John Adams and John Adams' female slave. Would he become the president? No, he'd be like Thomas Jefferson's kids, who none of us know. I'm not saying that they deserve to be unknown or anything. Just saying they weren't part of the American elite as far as I know. And this goes back to the very beginning of Islam. Although ironically it's not in the Quran or specifically stated in the Hadith, but it's understood, well, not totally explicitly stated. It's understood by all Muslim scholars immediately, which is that if a Muslim male fathers a child with his female slave, that child is one, free, 2, same social standing as children born of a free wife, and 3, his mother or her mother is freed upon the owner's death, and she can't be sold. So most of the Abbasid caliphs, all I think of the Ottoman sultans except one, as far as I know, except one, were children of slave women, not of free mothers. What does that mean about, let's say, race? The Ottoman sultans, by the time you get to the 1800s, I don't even want to think about how little the amount of Turkish blood they had in them was. They were probably genetically mostly Serbian and Greek and Italian, because they're, for generations, the mothers are all Serbians, Greeks, and Italians, Russians, other things like that. What about Abbasid caliphs? If some of their mothers were Persian, some of their mothers were Turkic, some of their mothers were African. What does this mean about phenotype, people's appearance? If you're walking down the streets in Cairo in the year 1300, let's say, and you see someone who would look like phenotypically black to us, let's say one of their parents is Arab, one of their parents is from Africa south of Sahara, that person could be what? I mean, just based on their appearance, their skin color, their phenotype, they could be anything. They could be the son of or the daughter of the, well, if they're daughter, you're probably not going to see their face in 13th century Cairo. There could be the son of the ruler. They could be member of the elite. Free-born member of the elite. Or they could be a slave from Ethiopia. You don't know. I mean, you can go by other indications, like how they're dressed, if they have like a bunch of dudes around them. But their phenotype is not going to tell you these things. This is interesting. This is a picture from a book written in the 1200s, a paintings done around 1300, from, by the way, Mazen Hashem, Mardin, where you've been,
Yeah.
right? The ruler of Mardin, it was designed for the ruler of Mardin. It is a guess what this is.
I know why that the Sultan's now probably like a descendant of the Sultan probably is like.
What is that? That is an automatic wine pouring machine. I'm not endorsing this. This is an automatic wine pouring machine. That is a paper mache slave woman that comes out 8 times an hour and refills your wine glass. Can I say, it's good to be the Sultan if you're an alcoholic. So it rolls out on those wheels. You put your glass there. It's like some kind of automatic barista. 10 minutes to go? Only 10 minutes?
Just until Q&A.
Oh, really? I think we started late.
We did.
Okay. What does she look like to you? This is interesting. This would be like, if you're going to make a typical paper mache slave woman in 1300, she's probably Persian or supposed to be Persian or Turkic. Okay. This is Ikhlas Khan, the Grand Vizier, slave Grand Vizier of the Bijapur around 1650 in the Deccan in India. Malik Ambar died 1626. The basically de facto ruler of Ahmednagar in the Deccan in India. They're both Ethiopians. Brought as slaves, become the senior administrators, and basically rulers of these dynasties for many decades. So slaves actually become part of the elite. All right. I think I can cover. I think I can discuss this easily. Okay. This is a picture from around the 1300 painting of the Prophet Muhammad's companions visiting the king of Ethiopia to ask for permission to seek refuge there. This is an interesting incident that's described in Ibn Abd al-Hakam's Conquest of Egypt, written in the mid-800s, but drawing on earlier sources. This is the Bishop of Egypt. They're asking the Muslim delegation, because the Muslims have conquered, this is around 638, 641 common era. The Muslims have just conquered Egypt. And there's a delegation that goes to the basically administrative leader of this Byzantine province of Egypt, the Melkite bishop. And they're led by a guy named Ubadah bin Samit, who the bishop asks, how can you accept this black man being the best among you? He should be below you in standing. The Muslims reply, not at all. Though he is black, as you see, he is among the best of us in station, among the best of us in precedence in Islam, in reason and in judgment, and blackness, Sawad, is not something disparaged amongst us. Interesting. But, who can think of an objection to this? Nazlan, I don't think you know the answer. Who can? Has anyone ever heard? But I admire your courage. What is the? No one's ever heard of the. Actually, well, there's often a story you hear that Bilal, the first muaddin, he was of Ethiopian descent, a slave of Safwan bin Umayyah. His father Umayyah. He was freed, bought by Abu Bakr, the first successor of the Prophet, an early Muslim convert. Freed and becomes a very important early Muslim. And there's a dispute between him and another early Muslim named Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. And Abu Dhar al-Ghifari says to him, Ya Ibn al-Aswad, you son of a, Ya Ibn al-Sawda, you son of a black woman. Everyone who's heard this story. This is not a reliable story. People get very mixed up. The thing with Abu Dhar says is, I got in a fight with a man and I insulted his mother. Then some people report that was Bilal. But actually the report where Abu Dhar says, you son of a black woman, this is a very rare hadith and it's very unreliable. Very unreliable from the perspective of Muslim hadith scholars. Which is interesting. People know the story. But in effect, well, first of all, now you know that story is actually highly unreliable. But the meaning is still indicative, in the sense that when Bilal, the Muslims have conquered Mecca, Bilal goes to give the adhan from on top of the Kaaba in Mecca. What do the Meccan elite say, who are still non-Muslim? They say, look at this crow. They couldn't find anybody but this crow to give the adhan. What do they mean when they say crow?
Disparagement.
What?
It's a disparagement.
Yeah, I mean, crows are what? They're birds, and they are what color birds?
Black.
They're blackbirds, right? So, they're you could easily, if you want to insult somebody in Arabia, if they had African descent, you could say you're black. It's an insult. So, isn't that a contradiction between what these guys are saying and what I just told you? Isn't that a contradiction? Not really. Blackness is not, in fact, disparaged. Other people who are black. Has anyone ever heard of Amr ibn al-As? Muslim who actually oversaw the conquest of Egypt on his own initiative. This just did, Caliph, I want to inform you, I've conquered Egypt. That's basically what happened, except no telephone. Other people. Safwan bin Umayyah, the son of the owner of Bilal, they're described as black. Their mothers were African. You know who else is described as black? Who's the second caliph of Islam? Umar ibn al-Khattab. One of the most influential people in Islamic history, without a doubt. Died 644 of the Common Era. Umar ibn al-Khattab. There's some reports that he was light-skinned, some reports that he was dark-skinned. At least, well, two of his grandparents, his grandmothers were African. Isn't that interesting? Did you ever know that? Did you ever think of when you ever hear of a story of Amr bin al-As being insulted by somebody saying, "You son of a black woman," or Umar bin Khattab, someone insulting him saying, "You son of a black woman," son of two black grandmothers? Has anyone ever heard this? No. Because in Arabia, at the time of the Prophet, the only thing that matters is being part of a tribe. And your tribal identity comes from only one person, your dad. Your mom could be whatever. It doesn't matter. If your father is from that tribe, especially a noble tribe like the Quraysh or Tamim or something like that, you're set. You're like a made man in the mafia. Nobody can touch you. The worst thing is to be an outsider, outside the tribal system. What are indications of being an outsider? One of them can be that you look like you're from a different country. Like you're really dark skinned, like you look like from Ethiopia. But if you have dark skin, but everyone knows your dad is you're part of the tribe, they're not going to insult you by talking about your skin color because your skin color is irrelevant. But if you are a former slave like Bilal, they'll attack you for what they can see. Question: Bilal had trouble getting married. Has anyone ever heard of that Bilal had trouble getting married? He did. Bilal had trouble getting married. There's another Muslim who had double the trouble Bilal had getting married. 2 times the number of stories about trouble getting married. About which other companion? No?
Salman Farsi.
Who?
Salman Farsi.
Did you read my book?
No.
Okay. What's your name? Yeah. Good thinking. Salman the Persian. Was Salman black? Salman was Persian. Salman was a former slave who also became a very important early Muslim. And he used to be insulted. Oh, who are your ancestors, Salman? What tribe are you from, Salman? He would say, I'm Salman, the son of Islam. So with Salman, they went after the fact that he didn't know his ancestors weren't Arabs. He had double the amount of trouble finding a wife in Arabia. Just like Bilal, he's a former slave. Just like Bilal, he's an outsider. But he's not black. It's being an outsider that's the issue. If the way to sort of get out of your outsiderness is blackness, that's what people are going to bring up. If you're not an outsider like Amr bin al-As or Umar bin al-Khattab or Safwan bin Umayyah, no one's going to talk about the way you look. Is this clear to everybody? Does everyone understand how what seems to be a contradiction is in fact not a contradiction? It's not understanding what the operative factors are. Does everybody understand that? How much? I'm now over the time, right? Okay. What time does it have to end?
People, if anyone needs to have.
How long? Okay, I've been talking for 45. I've been talking for about 45 minutes. I'll go one more slide. Good. There's an interesting picture. Anybody know what this is? Look at that horse on the right. I just noticed that guy. I guess horses kind of look like that. They have big teeth. This is Richard the Lionheart. Mazen, who's he sticking with his sword, with his lance?
It looks like a knight.
It is a knight. Yeah. Do you know who?
Maybe. No.
Good. You got a lot of chutzpah speaking in front of other people. That's a good habit. I want you to develop this. But you got to deliver the goods too. We'll discuss this later. This is Saladin. This is a picture from, I think, Britain, produced, I think, around in the 1400s, if I'm not mistaken. That's Saladin. Richard the Lionheart and Saladin they almost certainly didn't meet. They definitely didn't have a joust. Richard the Lionheart definitely didn't stick him through with his lance. But what does Saladin look like? What color is Saladin's skin? Yeah, he looks like some kind of weird blue demon. And look at his shield. What's on his shield? That's actually a pretty good kind of kid crayon drawing of like a kind of African someone from south of Sahara in Africa, right? That would be like a pretty good. I mean, for someone who's drawing a little thing on a shield, that's supposed to be Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad. It's interesting in European thought, even the medieval period, the conflation of Arabia and Africa, blacks, Arabs, Saracens, demons, it's all just mixed together in one big stew of other bad non-Christian people. Black as phenotype, black as metaphor, very important. Question. And where'd Mahmoud go? Went somewhere. Okay. We had this, I did a lot of research on this for my book. Anybody here, is anyone here from Africa, south of the Sahel, Sahelian Africa, Africa south of Sahara? Anybody here? 1, 2. Any of you know any language? You either know any languages from your local areas? What languages?
Speak Bambara.
Bambara and
Amharic.
Amharic. Okay. What is the name for like the typical person's skin tone who lives in, where's your family from in Mali?
Yeah.
Where they from? Are they from like?
Bamako.
Okay. So if you were to go and just grab a random person on the street in Bamako, and how would you, and what in Bambara, how would what language? Where would you say their skin color is?
Noir.
What?
Noir. It's like completely French. So noir.
In Bambara, you say noir.
Yeah.
Okay. Noir means black. Okay. I have a question. In Bambara, are there any phrases like black-hearted? You know, this is a black day.
Farafin. So fara means like your fara means skin, and then fi means like dark. So it's like dark skin.
Yeah, but what I mean is, are there any idioms? So in English, we'd say like he's black-hearted. You know, black sheep of the family. Think about it. I did as many languages as I could get information on, and I tried to interview people from these native speakers of language as well. A lot of languages in Africa south of Sahara. The word for normal skin tone of someone in that area is the word for black, like the same color as her hijab. That language also has phrases like black-hearted, black day, right? Everybody understand? Does everyone understand what I'm saying? So in America, we have this assumption that if you have a negative metaphoric meaning for blackness, is always assumed to kind of translate or be equated to or tied to black as a color descriptor. So the fact that we say, you know, blacklisted, black-hearted, right? That means that there's somehow like coded in our mind a contempt for or denigration of people who we call black. The problem with this argument is that in lots of languages, I don't want to say all, I mean, by the way, I'd say the majority of least languages that have been studied in the world, light and dark, light is a positive valence, dark is a negative valence. Not all the time. You know, sometimes things like, you know, this chocolate is really dark, or this, you know, like that can be good, or like dark beer or something could be good, right? So sometimes it's not always the same, but light is sort of positive, good, dark is negative. Why would that be? Why would this be pretty consistent across human languages? I have a question. Has anyone ever told you, I'm afraid of the light? I woke up in the middle of the day. I was screaming. I'm afraid of the light. There's a monster right over there. I mean, humans are diurnal creatures. We do stuff in the day. At nighttime we go to sleep. Where darkness is stuff you don't know. You can't see it, right? Kind of makes sense, at least metaphorically speaking, that this is pretty consistent or widespread in human languages. As in, even languages spoken by people who would describe themselves and who we in the modern global West would call black, phenotypically black. That is very interesting. I find that fascinating as an academic. Does anyone else find that fascinating? What does this mean? This means that we can't always assume a direct link between blackness as a color descriptor and blackness as a metaphor. Very important. One of my friends was talking about this yesterday. People love to talk about kind of cultural colonialism or intellectual colonialism or imperialism, American imperialism. I'm not going to debate this stuff. But you know the irony is, oftentimes super woke academics are involved in essentially American imperialism of human history. Everyone in the world has to think about race the way Americans think about race, which I find to be, well, imperial. I mean, other people in the world talk about color in different ways. Not everyone in the world has the same racial issues that Americans have. I'm not saying nobody else has them, but not everybody does. And not everybody in history did. This is very important. The Quran talks about, on the Day of Judgment, تَسْوَدُّ وُجُوهٌ وَتَبْيَدُّ وُجُوهٌ. There'll be faces that are whitened, and there are faces that are blackened. Question. I asked you this before. What are the three? How did Muslims or Arabs at the time of the Prophet generally break down people in terms of color? I said it was a tripartite distinction: black, white, red. If they would do it using a bipartite distinction, they would say black. They would say black and red. And by the way, most scholars think that Arabs consider themselves on the black half. When you see in Arabic black and whites, especially early Arabic at the time of the Prophet and early Islamic history, it is almost always being used not to describe people's skin color or their features, but to talk about moral evaluation. White is noble. Abyad al-wajh, he's white of face, he's noble. Black of face, ignoble. It's a language of, it's a metaphoric language. So blackened faces, whitened faces on the Day of Judgment, people who are felicitous, believers, people who are infelicitous, damned, unbelievers. And when you look at Muslim scholars commenting on these verses, this is exactly what they say. They say, this is a type of blackness that has nothing to do with blackness on earth. Nothing to do with it. This is whiteness that has nothing to do with whiteness on earth. Interesting question. When you go and you look at Muslim scholars from Africa south of the Sahara, like let's say Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, a great Senegalese scholar, died 1975, in his tafsir of the Quran, his commentary on the Quran. Other scholars from Senegal, how do they explain the meaning of these verses? Exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. Whether you're Persian or Senegalese, the understanding is the same. Very important to remember that metaphor and color descriptors they're not always connected at the hip. All right, I talked for a long time, so I'll answer any questions or hear comments you have. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Mazen, do you actually have a question?
Yeah. Why are like people, like old people, on Prophet Muhammad all different ways? Like this guy's drawing him white, but this guy's drawing him black.
This is Mazen, that's actually a good question. Thank you very much. Here's an interesting question. What was the color, how did the Prophet Muhammad look? There's actually a number of different reports. Yeah. Wait. Not Mustafa. What is it?
It's an olive skin.
Well, we would say today probably olive skin. Like he was not very dark, not very light. Luminous white. But something like a kind of light, like maybe, what's your name with the kind of Hawaiian shirt? Yeah, sort of like that would be kind of that would be white colored skin. No pressure. But my point is that that's probably what they meant. But guess what? And this is interesting. I asked one of my teachers, Senegalese sheikh, about this. It's a very interesting answer. So if you're like in Malaysia, let's say you live in Java, and this is the year 1700. So you live in a village in Java. Okay, there's no TV, there's no internet, whatever. You've met other people from other villages near you in Java. That's it. And you have a dream and you see the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, whoever sees me in their dream, it's like they've seen me in real life. The devil does not take my form. What would that person see? That Javanese person, what would they see? We don't know, but likely what would they see? I mean, if you've only ever seen Javanese people, what are you going to see? More Javanese people. Probably you see the Prophet as Javanese. That's the Prophet Muhammad. If you live in a village in near Bamako, I've been to Bamako. It's a nice place. And it's the year 1400. And you see someone who's the Prophet Muhammad in your eyes, who looks like people you know. That's the Prophet Muhammad. Interesting answer. It's all the Prophet Muhammad. Even though the Prophet Muhammad had to look one way, and we have descriptions of it, but his spiritual manifestation is however people, it's in the eye of the beholder. All right, other questions that are not from my own child. Yes, Ali.
Why did Islam just outright ban slavery the way it banned, like, I don't know, alcohol or something like that?
It's a really good question. Before. Nobody banned it. It would be like banning, chairs or something. I mean, it wouldn't make sense. Like, so it'd be like prohibiting work or something like that. It wouldn't have occurred. It wasn't conceptually possible. I think that's the best answer to the question. I mean, some people say, the same thing, by the way, Christians in the 1700s, 1800s said about Jesus. Why didn't Jesus, Benjamin Rush, I think he was from Philadelphia, wasn't he? Very early, founding father, abolitionist. You can read his debates with Southern, it's funny, not just with Southern slave owners, but people who actually they didn't like slavery, but they didn't find abolitionist arguments very compelling. So it wasn't like they were supporting slavery, they just didn't really buy a lot of abolitionist arguments. And you could read these debates. And they asked Benjamin Rush, why didn't Jesus ban slavery? And I said, well, it would have been too difficult. It would have been too disruptive. Which of course is ironic, because I never really thought about Jesus as being a guy who wasn't afraid to make waves. Right? Second, so he said, one of the letter writers says to Benjamin Rush is, so what you're telling me is that the Son of God on earth didn't have the courage to state something? He could just say, slavery is wrong. He could have just said that. He didn't have to say, I order you to get rid of all slaves. He could have just said that. He didn't. Rush didn't have an answer for that. Abolitionists actually didn't have answers for this question. So that's who was I talking to? Oh, it was you. Was that? Yeah, there's no answer for that except that it wasn't. Nobody thought about that until actually it was economically possible. I think that's the best answer for the question. Yes.
Is kind of ties back to what you said about Thomas Jefferson, but given that you studied this field, is there a certain influence on the U.S. Constitution from the Charter of Medina or from the Quran?
Is there an influence on the U.S. Constitution from the Quran?
From the Quran and the Charter of Medina. I've heard this theory. I'm just wondering if you had any insight on that.
You've heard that theory?
I've heard that Thomas Jefferson.
Not from somebody at Islam.
Okay.
No, I'm not just. I love Islam. I kid. No, people have a lot of ideas. Neil Armstrong went to the moon, heard the event. Jacques Cousteau went to the bottom of the ocean, heard the event. I don't know. I've never heard this discussed. First Adidas guy, then guy who's not that Adidas. Well, I'll take both your questions at once. I'll try to answer them. Yeah, first.
So my name is Danish.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for speaking. It was very enlightening. So my question is, how does the legal ways to obtain a slave in Islam differ, from other religions or just pre-Islam, the way that things were done?
Well, that's actually a good point. I meant to mention this, I forgot. So thank you. One of there's a couple major changes that Islamic law, the Quran, and Islamic law makes to slavery in the world in general, and in the Near East in particular. One, the one I did not mention, is that it restricts. So the main way into slavery, if you were in Rome in 200, or let's say Greece in 200 AD, or Damascus in 500 BC, was debt. Debt is the main way human beings in general end up as slaves. You can't pay someone money, you end up their slave. It's called debt slavery. Islamic law prohibits debt slavery. Another source of slavery in human history, selling your children into slavery. I know it's shocking to hear, but if you're starving, that might be the best way to not have your child starve. At least they're going to get fed. It's very common. leaving your children out, exposing them, like leaving a baby out to die because you can't support it. Someone comes and takes it. This is a major source of slavery in Europe up until the Middle Ages. Another major, self-dedication, giving yourself as a slave. I know people think this is crazy, but sometimes I think about this, especially like during COVID-19. Or I watched this movie, this TV show, Station 11. I watched a few episodes of it. It got too intense. I couldn't finish it. Anyone watch this? Or any of these dystopian movies, like the zombie movies. Like imagine that law and order completely disappears. And you're out there in like I would just be looking for anywhere, like there was a community where I'd be safe. Like there's like food, there's a wall and food and stuff inside. Someone said, you have to be my slave in order to live here. I said, okay, no problem, right? So if you, and it's very interesting, anthropologists have talked about this, especially in the 1970s and 80s. Freedom, like negative freedom, is the idea that no one can control you. People can't tell you what you can do. This is only valuable if you actually have basic security. Once you have basic security, then you're like, I want to wear this, I want to wear that, I want to do this job, I want to do that job, I want to go over here, I want to go over there. If you don't have basic security, then that's actually your primary concern. And negative freedom, what we think of as normally as freedom, is actually pretty useless. So a lot of humans in history who became slaves gave themselves as slaves. Another major source, capture and war. In Islamic law, the only way that people can be enslaved, like taken from free and made slaves, is they're captured in war. Non-Muslims, from outside the Muslim community, from outside the boundaries of the Muslim state, captured in war, those people can be slaves. That's the only source. That's legal in Islamic law. Yes?
You spoke about how if someone makes a mistake, one of the ways in which they could either fast for a certain number of days or feed some poor people, or they could free a slave, which, if I understand you correctly, hints at looking at slavery.
Their first option is if you have a slave, you should free a slave. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious, is that just a cultural thing or something to do with the times, or is there something fundamental about Islam or the Quran that leads people to look at slavery in that light as something?
I think it's something fundamental. I'll tell you why. There's when the earliest dictionary of Arabic, this is a good example. The earliest known dictionary, Arabic dictionary, is a guy named Khalil bin Ahmed in the late 700s, early 800s. He, in the definition of abd, slave, he says, just to make it clear, you're all slaves of God. The name Abdullah, slave of God. Abdurrahman, slave of the most merciful. What's one of the main words that the Quran uses to talk about human beings? Ibadullah, the slaves of God. When Muslims, and I'm sorry to say this, invented human rights, go look it up. Tell me when someone started talking about rights that all human beings have. Muslims talked about Haquq al-Ibad, the rights of the slaves. They mean the slaves of God. All human beings have these rights. The right to physical inviolability, the right to property, the right to due process. Whether you're a man or woman, Muslim, non-Muslim, free, slave. So the way that especially if you go back into all the way back to the ancient Near East, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, anytime you read the New Testament, like the servants of God, the word in Greek is doulos. It means slaves. Same thing in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Humans are the slaves of God. Slave and worshiper are the same thing. They're subordinate. There's the master, the Rabb, the Lord, and the slave, or the subordinate. If you have that, it's actually very uncomfortable, conceptually, to have the slave have a slave. So this is why in one hadith, very famous hadith, the Prophet says, don't call slave owners, don't call your slave my slave. Slaves, don't call your owner my master. They should say master maulaya, like my kind of patron. and the master should say to the slave, my boy or my girl. Because the Prophet says, you are all, there's only one Lord, only one master, and you're all his slaves. So I think there's it's a conceptually part of Islamic tradition that human slavery as a human institution is an uncomfortable institution. So there's this, I think, an attempt to sort of remove as many people as possible from that category. Hang on, yes, go ahead.
I think Bedr had a question to go first.
Oh, Bedr, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to get the second question from Bedr.
No, that's all right.
No, let's hear it.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the talk. I mean, first time I've heard about these topics. It's very nuanced topics. So thanks a lot. One thing I just wanted to ask a question because the brother over there asked a question about how this differs in an inspiration from maybe from the Quran. I'm part of me is sure that you might know about this. I know I've read a book called Thomas Jefferson's Quran. It was a faculty in University of Austin.
Yeah.
And so I'm maybe just asking the question differently was not necessarily direct inspiration. I realized maybe at the time there's some form of intellectual animosity between Muslims and the West, and Europe or America. So would there be some fundamental canonical ideas, not necessarily directly into like maybe the American mind or the American structure, but some inspiration?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I know this book. I haven't read it. I have nothing against it. I'm sure it's a good book, but I have not read it. So I don't know any. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I can't answer your question. I'm sorry.
We'll take like one more question, and then they've set up for us to pray Maghrib outside. So.
No question from any ladies.
I did actually have one, but I think Miriam's is better. No, go ahead.
No, definitely.
Okay, I was gonna say, actually before I came today, I had been like, just YouTube searching your name to watch a couple of clips, and I noticed some of the first results actually have to do with like controversy, which I mean has happened to a lot of Yaqeen Institute's scholars and whatnot. And I was wondering, how do you handle that sort of thing? I mean, you talk about sensitive topics like today, we talk about race and slavery and everything. How do you kind of handle those like people looking at you as a controversial figure or making a mistake?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that first of all, I'm interested in these topics because I have questions. And when I have questions about things, usually other people have questions. I mean, my questions are usually pretty typical, right? They're not super smart questions. They're questions I think that a lot of people have. I'm in a position that I have the skills and the time to answer them, and I have the job security to answer them. If I were not a full professor, I probably would be a lot more reticent to discuss these things. But I think that, I think that if you're honest, and if you have good intentions, and if you're always getting your work checked. I mean, it's very important to constantly get feedback on one's work. Like when I study these things, I'm constantly talking to other scholars and getting their, making sure that I'm not misunderstanding them, making sure that I don't have some crazy idea. So if you do a good job, you've done the best you can, you've checked your work, then if you have the answer for questions that people have, I think it's a responsibility of someone who's in that position to offer that to people.
Is that kind of why you involve your children in this sort of thing? Because I know in my
I didn't enjoy it. They came to this talk because this was. They maybe shouldn't have come to this talk. I don't know.
No, we in my family we kind of tiptoe around more sensitive topics when it comes to. I think my brother is about your son's age, and around him we kind of covered his ears around these sorts of things. Is that something you've kind of had to move past?
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know how well that works in the U.S. I mean, these topics are so, I don't know, probably like 20 years ago, let's just say 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, as a Muslim, look, I told this to the organizers, I hope they're not angry at me, but I mean, if you, 10 years ago, this talk would have been completely unnecessary. I mean, it would probably could just cause a lot of problems. But when ISIS happened, I mean, no, Muslims didn't have answers how to address this issue. They didn't have, because they just swept this under the carpet, they didn't want to talk about it, or tiptoed around it. They didn't have answers. And this was a major crisis for a lot of Muslims, a major crisis. Similarly, issues of race. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't go, like, if you Google, like, Muslims and race or something, and blackness, and just put that in Google, Islam and race, I guarantee you, one of the first things you're going to see is Islamic slave trade, Arab slave trade, Arabs are racist against black people, Islamic. I mean, I just don't know how this is avoidable. It's in almost every media, and I just think you have to know how to address this if you're gonna deal with these things. I just think otherwise you're just gonna get swamped. You're gonna get, like, it's gonna be a tsunami.
Yeah, with that.
Wait, hang on. One more question.
Sorry.
One more question. It's fine. I apologize.
No, you're fine. I'm just gonna check.
How long until Maghrib ends?
I think we got until 8:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question.
Was the Prophet and his companions ever like directly involved in slave trade?
No, not in slave trade. No,
Not even his companions?
I don't think so. I mean, like as a business, it wasn't. There were not really a lot. So in Arabia at the time of the Prophet, slavery was very. There were slaves. I mean, it was widespread, but it was very minimal in the sense that there was not. It wasn't like 25% of the society or something where you see it's like Rome. So it was, and slaves were more like. So there's a big difference between societies where slaves are commercial articles, and where they're just part of like the economy. So what do I mean by that? If you say, okay, we just raided this other tribe, we captured 5 people from that tribe. Most of this, the largest group of, in terms of ethnic group, slaves in Arabia were other Arabs. Number 2 group was Ethiopians. Number 3, about the same, Persians. So the largest plurality was actually other Arabs captured in raids. But what they weren't engaged in slave trade, so people didn't make money off this. Now, this is like a big change that happens, for example, in England, in Britain, in like the 800s, and the Vikings started attacking Britain. Before that, like, there was slavery in Britain, but no one thought that, like, okay, we can grab someone from this village here and sell them in France for like 10 times the amount. So there wasn't a commercial enterprise around it. It's only when Muslims like go out into the greater Mideast that they get integrated into the Mediterranean, Near Eastern slave trade. That really wasn't a part of slavery in like Northwest Arabia. Do you understand?
So we want to thank you, Dr. Brown, so much for this.